Figuring out budgets for a big backpacking trip can be such a headache, and we know it's definitely not the easiest thing to do. So we want to go through how much the past 9 months of backpacking through Southeast Asia has cost us. We've tracked each and every penny, and we're going to give you this information, so hopefully it will help you figure out a budget for your upcoming trip.
Hey guys, we're megandmorgs, and like Megan just said, we spent the past 9 months travelling through 10 different countries in Southeast Asia. If we could give you one of our budget tips, it would be to track each and every penny that you spend, just so that you can stay onto your budget and keep yourself on the road for just that little bit longer.
I think those small purchases really add up, and without actually tracking them and sort of justifying them to yourselves, it's so easy to go over budget. So highly recommend tracking each and every spend.
Before heading off on our trip, we calculated that around a £25 per person per day budget for this leg of the journey would be what we were trying to stick to. Of course, we knew that countries like the Philippines and Thailand, for example, would be a lot more expensive than Sri Lanka, India or Laos, for example.
Yeah, but I think if you work it out and average it over all of the countries, it works out well. We sort of had different daily budgets depending on what sort of country that we were travelling, and that worked for us.
After our 9 months of travel, we can reveal to you that we managed to stick to our budget and spent £24.74 per person per day. So the next part of the video will show you exactly how we did it.
We'll start by talking about what sort of travellers we are. I think there's sort of a scale from budget to bougie, and realistically we're somewhere in the middle. You know, we use sort of local public transport. We mainly eat local food. Sometimes we have a Western meal, but not all the time. We don't drink alcohol. We don't buy bottled water because we use our life straws. Accommodation wise, we sort of stay in private rooms with en-suites, but often that's cheaper than hostels. So yeah, we're somewhere in the middle. We don't cut back on activities, but we do enjoy a lot of free activities such as hiking and snorkeling. So yeah, we'll tell you what we've spent, and then if you travel differently, you might have to alter that price slightly more or slightly less depending on where on that budget to bougie scale you land.
We don't want to go into too much detail about the budgets of the different countries, but we'll tell you what we spent in each country and a couple of different budget facts that you might want to consider for when you visit them. We'll start off with Sri Lanka. Now this was our first country, so we decided to spend probably a little bit more money here and there, making ourselves comfortable and easing the transition into full-time travel. Over the month that we spent in the country, we spent £18.42 on average per person per day. Now, like I said before, we could probably spend a bit less, and you could probably do it around £16 to £17 per person per day.
Comfortably as well, I would say.
A couple of notes for Sri Lanka is that public transportation is extremely cheap. It would only cost a couple of pounds to maybe do a 2 or 3 hour bus journey. Now, these bus journeys weren't particularly comfortable, however it was a very cheap option to travel around the country. If you're not so keen on the buses, then the trains were a much nicer way to travel around the country. Still super cheap, but a bit more relaxing, you had a bit more space.
Yeah, a bit more comfortable than the crazy buses, because the buses just get so packed. But yeah, again, talking about budgets, transportation super cheap, activities predominantly free in the country, although we did splurge on a yellow safari. But yeah, we had an amazing month there, and it's definitely a great budget destination. After Sri Lanka, we spent 3 months travelling through the Rajasthan area in northern India. Our daily average spend there was £17.09. Again, we probably could have done this a lot cheaper, but India is an incredible, crazy country, and we definitely had some culture shock. So to us, we definitely sort of paid a bit more in terms of accommodation and food. We didn't necessarily eat street food because we were a bit nervous about food poisoning. But yeah, if you are eating street food, you can get that price right down because it is such a cheap country to travel.
One budget tip that I've got for you for India is make sure that you never pay the first price. Whether you're in the markets or bartering with tuk-tuk drivers, you know, the first price is unlikely going to be the correct price that you're paying.
Yeah, if you're not sure, a good tip that we sort of followed was Googling how much we should actually pay for something, and then you know that you're getting a good price.
Uber is actually quite a good way of getting around the country if you want to get a taxi, and they also have rickshaws on there. You can take the Uber price and then go to negotiate with a rickshaw driver, knowing that you don't want to pay more than the price that was on Uber. We did that to sort of make sure that we didn't get scammed by rickshaw drivers.
Although 9 times out of 10 they will laugh in your face and say, I am not driving you for that price. If you just walk away, they'll call you back and you'll get it for that price.
But if you're not so bothered about getting the correct price or sticking to, such a strict budget, then, you can be a bit more lenient with that.
Similarly to the rickshaws, if you are willing to walk away when it comes to buying things in the markets, 9 times out of 10 you will get the price that you are willing to pay.
A bit of an outlier for this trip is Nepal, where we spent over £49 per day. This is just down to the 10-day Everest base camp trek that we did, and we didn't really actually travel throughout the country as much as what we would have liked to do, just because of the timings of things. But I suggest that the prices in Nepal are very similar to India, so you could easily comfortably travel through the country under £20 per person per day.
Our biggest budget tip for Nepal, if you are wanting to do some trekking, is to book it when you're there, because the prices are so much cheaper in person than they are online. And also go between different booking offices and compare and contrast the prices versus what you are actually getting with that deal. We were happy with the amount that we paid for our Everest base camp trip. After Nepal, we spent one incredible month island hopping our way around the Philippines. Now, due to some domestic flights and the transportation costs between the islands, I would personally say the Philippines is slightly more costly than your average Southeast Asia backpacker destination. As such, we spent £30.27 per person per day, and I think that is predominantly due to those transport costs. We also did a lot of activities whilst we were in the country, lots of boat trips, canyoneering. There's so much to do. So yeah, definitely budget a bit more if you are considering adding it to your itinerary.
One thing that I will say for the Philippines is, though, there are lots of budget activities and free activities that you can do. Lots of hiking, snorkeling, and just enjoying the beautiful beaches. So don't be put off by visiting the Philippines just because we spent a lot of money there. You can have a great time on a tighter budget. It's just you might want to go to maybe fewer islands or stay in maybe 1 or 2 places rather than the 5 or 6 different islands that we travelled.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think the islands that you go to should be less touristy as well if you are wanting to stick to a budget. More touristy islands such as Palawan or Coron, they are inevitably more expensive, especially that accommodation there, because options are limited. So go to less touristy islands, maybe a few less islands, you travel at a slower pace, and you can definitely do it more on a budget.
However, maybe controversially for our budget, I would actually recommend doing as much as you can in the Philippines. All those touristy places are touristy for a reason and well worth spending your money there, even if it is a bit over your budget. Next up, one of our absolute favourite countries on this trip is Vietnam. Also very affordable, as we spent just over £20 per person per day, including the amazing 4-day, 3-night Ha Giang Loop trip that we did, which although was quite expensive, almost £200 per person, we think that is an absolute essential for any Southeast Asia itinerary.
I think that was genuinely our favourite activity from the whole time travelling, and it's so worth spending the money for it.
Food and drink is extremely cheap in the country. You can get cheap beer if you're someone that likes to drink. Transportation was extremely convenient, but we did spend quite a lot of money on just because of the distances that you have to travel. If you're travelling from the north all the way down to the south, you'll be taking sometimes 12-hour sleeper buses. The distance that you're covering, it can't be cheap. But as you can see, even with those large distances and our trips and activities, we managed to stick well below our £25 per person per day budget.
Also, one thing I think accommodation wise in Vietnam, it was actually cheaper for us to have like a private room with an ensuite than it would have cost us to stay in a hostel. So that's just something to think about if you are sort of a couple or 2 friends travelling around. After Vietnam, we then headed to Cambodia, originally planning only 10 days there. We actually enjoyed it so much we stayed for almost 3.5 weeks, and I urge you to do the same. Give Cambodia a chance to show you what it's got to offer, the people, the views, the culture. It's just got a little bit of everything. So our daily spend in Cambodia was £20.43, and interestingly, a lot of backpackers told us that it was a more expensive destination in Southeast Asia. We didn't find that at all, and I don't know if that's because people don't really give it a chance. So if you're sort of speed running Phnom Penh and Siem Reap, and then you're spending a lot of money on the Angkor Wat day, it may seem expensive, but slowing down and taking our time, we didn't find it at all. Obviously, Angkor Wat is more expensive for a day trip, but I think it's highly worth it.
It is. It's one of the most iconic destinations in Southeast Asia, and we managed to average it out across the country from the sort of 3 weeks that we spent in the country. But yeah, like Megan said, we can't recommend visiting Cambodia enough. Next up is our cheapest country to travel on this trip so far, and that's Laos. We spent £15.85 per person per day. Now, we did have a week of rain that stopped us from doing the Takek Loop and any activities in Paksay, so we'd probably suggest that it will probably cost around sort of like £17 per person per day travelling as we would. But still, that's an incredibly affordable place to travel. We still got up to some great activities, went to some places maybe that other people wouldn't go. We went right up to the north to Nong Keo. We spent
all the way down to the south in Don Dat, so we literally did the whole length of the country.
Yeah, I would recommend you do it as well, just because similar to Cambodia, I think lots of places get missed out when people travel, but it's well worth visiting the full length of the country because there's so much to do. The food was really good, really cheap. It was just very affordable in every single sort of measurement of budgets. So we'd really recommend you add it to your itinerary.
After Laos, we had one incredible month in Thailand where we were actually joined by my parents for 3 of those weeks. So our cost there isn't really representative of what we probably spent. At the same time, we were sort of having more of a holiday rather than staying in our usual budget accommodation. Now, our daily spend was actually £20.55. I think after us planning everything for my parents, they wanted to sort of help subsidise some of those costs. So we had more of a bougie experience for less. So it worked out really well and we had an amazing time with them. But I do think if you are wanting to travel Thailand, this will be one of the more expensive countries, similar to the Philippines. And the reason being, transport between the islands is just expensive. So depending on how many islands you're thinking about doing and visiting, you'll probably be looking at more sort of £25 to £30, depending how on that budget to bougie scale you travel.
Now, there's a few budget tips for Thailand that I'd like to share with you. One is that the north is a lot cheaper, sort of going north from Bangkok to sort of Chiang Mai, Chiang Rai, Pai, that sort of area, a lot cheaper than the south. In addition to this, travelling the country in rainy season saw that our accommodation costs were half of what they would be in the high season, sort of in the months from November to maybe February. Now, this wasn't actually a detriment to our trip. We didn't have that many rainy days, and we really had a great time, and so did Megan's parents as well. They didn't sort of miss out on anything because of bad weather. So just keep that in mind. If you want obviously the perfect trip with the perfect weather on the majority of the days, then of course, book in the high season. But if you're on a budget and you don't really mind about having maybe a rainy morning, a couple of hours or whatever, then we'd really implore you to visit in the rainy season, because at some of the hotels, there was barely any people there. It was just us and a couple of other families.
And the cost was so much less as well.
Yeah, we saw some accommodation costs for high season versus low season, and it was literally double in the high season. So yeah, if you're on a budget, you can do Thailand a bit cheaper in the rainy season. The next country on our trip was Malaysia. We spent an average of £27.47 per person per day in the country, and that's quite cheap considering the amount of ground that we managed to cover. The main costs were domestic flights, so we took flights from Langkawi to Penang, and also a number of flights getting ourselves into the heart of Borneo. And we'd recommend, if you're going to be doing a lot of sort of travelling around on domestic flights, and this goes for the rest of Southeast Asia as well, make sure to book those as far in advance as you can, that you can still be flexible with your plans. We found that doing this, we could get super cheap flights from Kuala Lumpur into Borneo, and it just meant that we could sort of stay close to our £25 per day budget, but we knew that we'd be spending a bit more. Including Borneo, we did so many amazing activities, including a 3-day river safari. We spent so much time seeing as much of the beautiful jungle and the animals as we could, and we had no regrets.
No.
And we didn't really spend too much more of our budget than what we would have hoped, really.
I do think if you are planning on visiting Malaysia, don't write Borneo off as being super expensive and out of your budget. It's a lot more affordable than what we had originally perceived. That £27.47, yes, it would be less if we just stuck to mainland Peninsular Malaysia, but Borneo was honestly such a highlight for us, so don't write it off, include it in your itinerary and just book those domestic flights early.
And if you're wondering how we did it so cheaply, you can go check out our Borneo videos. We do a bit more explaining for you there. And also you just need to do a bit more research, because I think lots of people get sort of caught out by finding it too difficult and booking on expensive tours. But you really can do it yourself, book those domestic flights, find some cheap accommodation using booking.com or Agoda, work out a little tour run by local people rather than a big international company, and you can really do it yourself and save a lot of money doing so.
Now, last but not least, we spent one incredible month in Indonesia. We did as much of it as possible in 1 month. We spent time in East Java, Bali, Flores, the Komodo Islands, Lombok. So we definitely didn't hold back. And the fact that our daily spend came in just over £25 per person is actually a testament to just how affordable Indonesia is as a country. One thing to mention is we did sort of limit our time in Bali, which I think definitely helped keep that daily average lower, and we ate predominantly local food. As we said, we definitely did not hold back with activities for Indonesia. We did volcano treks, we did a 4-day boat trip, so it's just a testament to how cheap the country really is to travel.
So we'd just like to finish the video with 5 top tips for budget travel in Southeast Asia that we think will help you.
First and foremost, make sure you are tracking each and every penny that you spend. It'll really open your eyes to how those little purchases really add up. An ice cream each day might not seem a lot, but long term that definitely adds up. We do it on a notes page and then put everything into a spreadsheet just so you can see how much your daily average is.
Now, it might sound a bit pernickety, it might take ages or whatever, but in fact, it's not that bad at all. Just when you're spending something, just put it in a notes page. And then you at the end of the week, or maybe you've got a free couple of hours or whatever, and when you feel like it, you can then update your spreadsheet and just keep a track of everything. It just saves that sort of horrible feeling like, I think we've spent far too much money, or there's not as much money in my bank as what I thought there would be, those sorts of things. And then, you just save yourself that worry because you're sticking to your budget. Or, if you're a little bit over, how much over you are. So maybe you can draw back for another week, spend less money on eating out and those sorts of things. Or in the next country, you can spend a bit less money. Next up, as I previously mentioned, travelling in rainy season or shoulder season can be beneficial for your budget, just because there'll be less tourists, less demand for accommodation, and therefore prices at hotels will be less.
Also, there's more wiggle room. If you're wanting to book some activities like we did when we were in the Thai islands, you can sort of barter more for a cost rather than having set prices. Next up, and this is a big tip, is sort of planning your itinerary methodically. So you will be limiting international flights, which can add up very quickly, especially if you are paying baggage costs. So for example, you could start in Vietnam like we did, head across to Cambodia, up to Laos, and then down to Thailand, and just do border crossings as opposed to international flights.
Speaking of flights, if you have to take any international flights or domestic flights, if you can book them early and still be flexible within your sort of itinerary around them, we'd recommend it, just because the costs of the flights do add up if you're sort of booking quite close to when you need to fly. The airlines put the prices up, you know how it works. But yeah, we saved a bit of money once we sort of realised this was the case.
Yeah, I think we got caught out in the Philippines, where sometimes you have to take domestic flights between the islands, particularly if they are a large distance apart from each other. So just keep an eye out and plan accordingly. Next up, live like a local. So eat local food and use local transport. And I think this is the number one thing that you can do on a day-to-day basis to make sure that your costs are coming in below budget. Because if you do eat Western food every single day, it really does add up. And for example, when you're taking transport, using local transport such as rickshaws or public buses as opposed to private taxis.
Finally, something a bit extra for you is to have a budget buffer. Now you can work this out maybe as a percentage of the budget that you allocate to each country. And we found that was really useful just as a mental thing to know that, you know, if we ever got into any situations where money was needed to fix them, we would always have that extra bit of money, you know, to help solve those issues. And it was just like a weight lifted off our shoulders. Thankfully, we didn't have any issues or nothing major anyway, but it's just nice to have that bit of buffer. And, you know, at the end of the day, if you don't spend it, you can just sort of like, you know, have it for when you get home. So it's, you know,
a win-win.
Exactly.
We really hope that you have found this video useful. If you do have any questions at all, drop them below in the comments. If you have found it useful, please make sure to like and subscribe. And as always, we'll see you in the next one.